This is Lecture 3, Part 1. This is Chapter 5 in your book. It's kind of hard to define this region because this region isn't very regional. It's connected more by history than anything else, and so I like to call it the former Soviet Union because basically that's the countries you're looking at. We're looking at the countries that were part of the Soviet Union, which was active from 1917 to 1989. When we think of Soviets or Russians, we typically generalize them as being big, evil, bad, muscular, whatever, or silly, goofy. But we all have these ideas of what Russians are, what they look like, and what they sound like. They all have accents like this, and it's partially true, but there's a lot more to Russia than just a whole bunch of bad guys. And if you were a child who grew up between 1945 and 1989, you knew that Russians were bad because we were ingrained in that, because we were involved in the Cold War with them. This is a map of the former Soviet Union. These are the countries we're going to look at. First, we're going to look at the physical geography. The gray area up there at the top right on that map is the Eastern European plain. It's the same plain from Europe. It starts in southern France, works its way across northern France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Poland, and into this region. And most of this region is Eastern European plain. The soil is very rich. It is the wettest region of all of them, of the ones we'll cover in this area, and it's heavy into farming. One reason why it is so heavy into farming is the soil there, the Chernozem, or the black earth as it's called, is this really good, thick, rich, black soil that is found primarily in the Ukraine. We find the same soil in Argentina and also in places like Nebraska in the United States. The Ural Mountains are the small little strip of mountains between Ekaterinburg and Perm. It's a straight little strip. There's not a whole lot to it. It's just one little small strip of mountains. But the key thing it does is it serves as an unofficial border between Europe and Asia. And it's pretty much drawn on most maps around the world that this is the dividing line between Europe and Asia. And it serves as kind of a cultural barrier between the two. Beyond the Ural Mountains, we have the Siberian Plain. The Siberian Plain is cold and dry. It's very sparsely settled. It's Siberia, and when you think of Siberia, you think of vast, cold areas. But it's home to a lot of natural resources, like gold, diamonds, oil, and coal, especially the oil. That's the big one right now. One of the features of this area is permafrost. And permafrost is this phenomenon that occurs where the soil freezes, and down below the soil it freezes. And so if you were to take a shovel and go out in December in this part of Siberia, you couldn't dig because it's solid ice right up underneath that little tuft of grass you have growing in your yard. Permafrost. It's permanent frost. It's continual frozen earth. Now during the summer it'll melt. It'll get a little boggy and it'll dry out a little bit. But during the winter it's a solid sheet of ice underneath the soil. This just kind of shows you how snowy it can be in Siberia. That's a telephone pole right there on the right. You know, those things are 20 feet tall, and that's snow, and the dude is standing next to that. So that's got to be 15 feet of snow. On the left, those trucks are 10 feet tall, maybe taller, and there's an additional 5 or 6 feet of snow on top of them. Beyond the Siberian Plain is the far eastern plateau. It's even more sparsely settled than Siberia. It's high in Asian population. I'll get to that in a second. And it's an autonomous region, which means that it has some freedoms to do whatever it wants to do. Now, those are limited. This region, you'll find a lot of, I guess you could call them native tribes, kind of like we have Indians, Native Americans here in the United States. These native tribes of Siberia live in this region also. And they speak their own language. They're a different nation of people than the rest of Russia. It is growing, strangely enough, in Chinese population because China is right at the very bottom of this part of Siberia. Here's the plain, and down below we have China. So there are a lot of Chinese people who actually are moving to this area as gas and oil workers or miners working in the region. Yeah, I put the picture below or behind the map, sorry. But that's a picture during the summer of what it looks like in the plateau of Siberia. The southeastern steppe is very, very, very dry. This is the bottom portion down here. And then the area that's in white down below there. It's very dry. It's very heavy into irrigation. They have a lot of canals in which they divert water from the major rivers and send them to the farms so that they can grow whatever it is they need to grow. Finally, the Caucasus Mountains. The Caucasus has a lot of nations of people. And when you have a whole lot of nations of people combined in a very small area, you get a lot of conflicts. And so that's what this region is. One of the major climatic phenomena that occurs in this region is continentality. And what that really means is the distance away from the ocean causes your climate. For example, let's say here, they're thousands of miles from the nearest ocean. This way, there's the Pacific, the Atlantic is way over here, the Arctic is up here, and the Indian is several thousand miles south of here. A place like this right here is so far from the ocean that the ocean cannot influence its weather. The farther a place is from the ocean, the drier it will be. And this is true. Compare Nebraska to Mobile, Alabama. Nebraska, they're lucky if they get 30 inches of rain a year because they're so far from the oceans that the moisture from the oceans doesn't really carry that far most of the times. As opposed to Mobile, which is right on Mobile Bay, right along the Gulf of Mexico. Mobile is one of the wettest cities in America. It gets almost 100 inches of rain a year. It rains a lot there because it's right along the Gulf of Mexico. So the ocean helps regulate temperatures, but the further you are away from the ocean, the more of a slide between highs and lows each day that they'll have. For example, during the summer, in somewhere like Kansas or Nebraska, the high may be 95, but the low dips down into the 50s because there's no ocean nearby to regulate temperature. The Caspian Sea is this the large sea. It's actually the world's largest lake. It's called a sea. I don't really know why, because it's really just a really huge lake. It is salt water. That may be why it's called a sea. But it's also very oil rich. You can see the oil platform in the picture there. And then the Aral Sea, which is on your map. The Aral Sea, you can see what's been happening to the Aral Sea. 1964 is the black and white picture at the top left. And then by 1987, by 1997, and then by 2002, you can see how much the Aral Sea has shrunk. And it shrunk due to irrigation, due to the fact that the water from the rivers that used to flow into this sea are being diverted. They're being used for agriculture. And so because of that, we have a drying out of the Aral Sea. And it's a major ecological disaster because this little sea regulates the temperature around that area. It's a microclimate is what it is. And you can see that, and it says down at the bottom, an 80% volume reduction. Doubles the salinity, the amount of salt in the water. So it's very tragic effect that's been happening. Now, since then, they've realized, the people of the area realize we need to get more water into the Aral Sea because it's killing off the fish that live in the Aral Sea because it's so salty. So they are working on remedying the situation. There's a photograph of what's happened as it's shrunk. You can see it's kind of divided now into two, almost three separate seas. Finally, Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal is over in Siberia. It's actually in a rift between two tectonic plates. That's why it's kind of straight like that. And it's the world's deepest lake. It's very deep. Like, scientists have not reached the bottom of that lake yet. It's very deep, very narrow. Has a lot of different weird types of fish that do not occur anywhere else in the world.